At 2:03 a.m. on October 12, 2021, David Collins, 34, an auto mechanic from the suburb of Maplewood, Illinois, received a call from the county coroner's office. The duty officer informed him that his mother, Carol Collins, 57, had been fatally shot during a document verification near her home on Elmhurst Drive. The preliminary report described the incident as a justified response. Carol allegedly drew a gun during the stop, forcing officers Daniel Drake and Victor Morales to open fire. At 3:40 a.m., David arrived at the county morgue. The attendant escorted him to the identification room. His mother's body lay on a metal table, covered to the shoulders. He saw 3 distinct bullet wounds in her back. The coroner confirmed the cause of death as multiple gunshot injuries. Later that morning, at a police briefing, investigators displayed photographs of the weapon found near the scene, a compact .38 revolver with a filed-off serial number. The official narrative stated it was discovered a few feet from Carol's right hand. Officers Drake and Morales claimed she had reached into her handbag, ignored commands, and pulled the firearm. David immediately doubted the story. His mother had feared guns since her brother's suicide 15 years earlier. She refused to touch one and often said she could not be near them. No firearm had ever been registered to her name. Internal Affairs assigned Detective Raymond Harris, 46, to review the shooting. He followed protocol, interview officers, verify the evidence, and prepare a summary report. The only civilian witness, neighbor Keiko Yamanaka, 63, stated she saw light flashes near Carol's driveway and heard several shots. When asked what she saw in Carol's hands, she replied, "It was dark." I couldn't tell David attended the reading of the preliminary statement on October 15th. The police repeated that the officers had acted lawfully. No new information was provided. David requested access to his mother's belongings. A sealed box contained her wallet, phone, keys, and a small notebook. The phone's recent call list and messages were deleted. In the notebook's final page, written in blue ink, was a single line. June 17, 2008, truth. On reviewing her bank statements, David noticed another inconsistency. On October 5, 1 week before her death, Carol had withdrawn $8,000 in cash from her savings account at Prairie Trust Bank. The bank clerk's note described her as nervous and distracted. There were no further deposits or significant purchases afterward. David lived with his wife, Lisa, and their 6-year-old daughter in a rented apartment in Maplewood. Lisa urged him to stay calm and wait for official results. She reminded him that internal investigations took time and that assumptions could lead nowhere. David outwardly agreed, but could not dismiss the contradictions. 3 bullets in the back, a missing call log, an unexplained withdrawal, and a date connected to nothing. On October 18th, Carol's funeral was held at Maplewood Cemetery. A few relatives and neighbors attended. Officer Daniel Drake stood apart, smoking near the entrance, watching the family. David noticed his detached, assessing stare. That evening, David searched his mother's house. The rooms were orderly, no signs of forced entry or recent visitors. Bills were current through September. A folder with receipts contained some from 2008, groceries, gas, dry cleaning, but nothing related to the mysterious date. On October 19th, David spoke with his coworker Wade Jensen, 36, a former Marine who now worked as a tow truck operator. After hearing the details, Wade suggested using his contacts to ask questions at the sheriff's office. David refused, saying the truth would come out through proper channels. Wade only replied, "Don't count on it." Detective Harris completed the preliminary report on October 21st. According to the file, officers observed Carol walking from her parked vehicle to her residence when they stopped her to verify identification after a local burglary alert. The officers claimed she became defensive, reached into her purse, and drew a revolver. Both fired simultaneously. Autopsy confirmed 3 bullets entering from behind. The revolver, partially smudged with prints, was booked as evidence. David requested access to the ballistics data, but was informed it was restricted, pending the internal review. The report made no mention of the deleted phone records or the bank withdrawal. The case appeared close to administrative closure. On October 23rd, David visited Prairie Trust Bank again. The branch manager confirmed the withdrawal. Surveillance footage was already erased, as the system kept recordings for only 2 weeks. The manager recalled Carol, looking over her shoulder several times during the transaction. She refused a cashier's check, insisting on cash. By late October, David realized the investigation was stalling. The official version, that his mother had drawn a gun, was now established fact within the department. Officers Drake and Morales were placed on short administrative leave and then reinstated. On November 3, 2021, David Collins retained Sandra Ortiz, 41, a civil rights attorney in Springfield, Illinois. She accepted after warning that officer cases in their county rarely favored families, plan, preserve evidence, depose officers, and seek internal affairs files. During disclosure, Carol Collins's history surfaced. Records from 2001 to 2003 showed a misdemeanor insurance misrepresentation, resolved by fine and probation. Bank and casino logs from 2004 to 2006 documented repeated gambling losses and short-term debts to local bookmakers. Counsel for officers Daniel Drake and Victor Morales used this to frame Carol as impulsive, unstable, and prone to risk. On November 10, neighbor Keiko Yamanaka filed an amended statement. She now claimed Carol was waving something metallic before shots. Sandra logged the timing. Days later, David learned from a city employee that Yamanaka's son, Takumi, a parking enforcement clerk, had been promoted to field supervisor effective November 8. No proof of a link, but the sequence stayed in the case notes. Ballistics arrived November 12. The state lab confirmed the recovered .38 had been fired recently. Sandra hired an independent examiner, Alan Peterzak, 55, a former state analyst. Peterzak reported that latent prints on the revolver's grip and trigger were smudged and non-ridge-bearing, consistent with a surface wiped and later handled. He found no clear ridge detail matching Carol. Sandra moved to admit the report and requested leave for further testing. At the December 1 motion hearing, Judge Leland Marks excluded Peterzak's opinion for insufficient foundation, ruling that unreadable prints could not prove post-incident manipulation. Only the state summary remained. Sworn testimony began December 6. Drake and Morales testified on consecutive days. Their accounts matched in sequence and phrasing. Each described a compliance check near Elmhurst Drive, a request for identification, a sudden reach into a bag, and a revolver raised in their direction. Sandra cross-examined on distances, lighting, and positions. When asked independently to diagram the scene, both produced near-identical sketches with the same labels and measurements. Sandra noted, "Word-for-word alignment is not typical." Meanwhile, David pursued the blue ink note in his mother's notebook. On December 7, he searched June 2008 using library terminals. Initial results showed routine items. He switched to microfilm at the Maplewood Public Library and reviewed that month day by day. On a column for June 18, he found a brief notice. Brittany Holmes, 19, student, reported missing. Last seen June 17, around midnight, leaving a party. Police investigating David photographed the item and added it to the binder. The date matched his mother's entry exactly. He flagged it for Sandra. On December 9, Sandra deposed Mrs. Yamanaka. The witness repeated something metallic, but failed on specifics. Asked whether she saw a flash from Carol or the officers, she said, "I saw flashes. I cannot separate them." Asked to describe the shape, she answered, "Shiny, maybe square." A description inconsistent with a revolver. Sandra marked the inconsistencies for impeachment. In court December 13, the state presented its examiner, who confirmed the gun had fired. The prosecution emphasized Carol's past finances and misdemeanor, to suggest agitation and reckless conduct. Sandra countered with records showing consistent employment since 2009 as an office part cleaner, rent paid on time, no current debts, and zero balances on credit cards. She argued that stress from 15 years earlier did not explain 2021 conduct without current triggers. She also listed gaps: deleted calls never addressed by internal affairs, the $8,000 cash withdrawal on October 5 with no trace, and a neighbor altering her account after a family promotion. That evening, David returned to the library. He requested the original missing person number for Brittany Holmes. The index showed an investigation from June 17 to September 22, 2008, then stamped inactive, voluntary absence. No public supplements noted sightings, travel, or contact with relatives. He wrote the dates on a legal pad and circled them. On December 16, Drake gave brief rebuttal testimony. He denied any knowledge of Brittany Holmes and repeated that Carol raised a gun. Morales did the same. The synchronization persisted. The jury received the case on December 17 at 9 a.m. Deliberations lasted about 3 hours. At 12:22 p.m., the foreperson announced the verdict. The officers acted within policy. Force was justified as self-defense. David remained seated, looking at his mother's note and the photograph of the June 2008 clipping. By evening, Sandra advised that appeals were possible but uncertain. David asked whether the date could matter. She answered, if she wrote it days before her death, it mattered to her. Find out why. Over the following weeks, David stopped maintaining a routine. He spent days at home reviewing transcripts, drinking whiskey, and staring at the box containing his mother's belongings. His wife Lisa left on February 8, taking their daughter to stay with her sister in Peoria. The note she left read only, "You need help, not revenge." 2 days later, Wade Jensen entered David's apartment after receiving no response to calls. He found him unconscious on the floor among stacks of documents and printouts. Empty bottles stood beside case files. Wade helped him up, cleaned the room, and told him to start eating. "If you keep doing this, they've already won," he said. Once he regained focus, David reopened his independent inquiry. His attention turned to the missing student from June 2008, Brittany Holmes. He searched for traces of her online, locating a set of forum posts on archived message boards from 2009 to 2013. The posts were written by a user identified as Holmes_mom, describing her daughter's disappearance, pleading for leads, and criticizing local police for closing the case. The last post dated to 2018, signed, "Still looking, always." A public record search confirmed that Brittany's mother, Angela Holmes, died of a heart condition in 2018, aged 55. David created a list of Brittany's known associates using old yearbook photos and social media archives. By late February, he identified her former boyfriend, Marcus Dean, who had attended the same college in 2008. David sent him a message explaining he was reviewing old police procedures. Dean replied on March 3 and agreed to speak through a video call. Marcus described that night in detail. Brittany had been drinking heavily at an off-campus party. Concerned for her safety, he called the police non-emergency line around midnight to request assistance taking her home. 2 patrol officers arrived approximately 20 minutes later. Marcus said they wore standard uniforms and drove a marked car. Brittany was conscious but disoriented. The officers told Marcus they would take her to a residence to sleep it off. She entered the back seat voluntarily. That was the last time he saw her. David asked if he remembered their names or faces. Marcus said he never learned the names but remembered both were young, early 20s, one taller and lighter-skinned, the other shorter, heavier build. He recalled that the tall one had a narrow jawline and a small scar above the eyebrow. David compared that description to department photos from personnel rosters available through public archives. The resemblance matched Daniel Drake and Victor Morales during their early service years in 2008. David compiled the information into a timeline. June 17, 2008. Brittany Holmes taken by patrol officers matching Drake and Morales' description. Case declared voluntary disappearance in September. 2021. Carol Collins killed during stop involving the same officers. Between those points, Carol worked at the Maplewood Police Department from 2015 to 2017 as a janitor under a city maintenance contract. By cross-referencing personnel shifts from that period, David realized Carol had routine access to the file storage area and discarded reports awaiting shredding. He theorized she encountered an old internal memo or evidence log referencing Brittany Holmes. The notebook entry, June 17, 2008, Truth, appeared to record the discovery. Within weeks, Carol withdrew her savings, perhaps planning to leave town. but the officers found out first. On March 8th, David requested a meeting with Detective Raymond Harris. He brought printed evidence, including Marcus Dean's statement, the photo comparison, and the note. Harris listened in silence for several minutes, then interrupted. "You're chasing ghosts. This department can't operate on online theories." When David pressed him about the deleted phone data and his mother's employment records, Harris stood up, pointed to the door, and said, "Get out. Before I write you up for harassment." David left, but noticed Harris's expression: tight, uneasy, eyes avoiding contact. 2 days later, on March 10th at 11:42 p.m., David received a call from an unlisted number. The male voice on the line said, "Your mother stuck her nose where it didn't belong. You're smarter than her, right?" The call ended immediately. David reported it to the precinct. The responding officer logged the report, but noted the number was unavailable. On the night of March 11th, 3 masked men forced entry into David's apartment at 2:15 a.m. The attack lasted under a minute. He was struck repeatedly and left on the floor with 3 fractured ribs. One of the assailants said, "Last warning, they left without taking valuables." When police arrived, they found no fingerprints or usable evidence. Building cameras were listed as under maintenance since February 27th. The report closed as assault by unknown persons. David spent 5 days in county hospital. Detective Harris visited once, asked routine questions, and left within 5 minutes. Wade arrived later that day carrying clothes and a small notebook. He sat beside the bed and said quietly, "The system won't touch them. You already proved that. Either accept it or do what needs to be done." David looked at him, bruised and silent. After a long pause, he said, "Teach me." By late March, David was discharged. The hospital chart listed his injuries as blunt force trauma, ribs 7 to 9 fractured. He walked slowly but with steady resolve. In early April 2022, David Collins acted on a plan he had formed during recovery. Through Wade Jensen's acquaintance, a retired dock worker, he purchased an unregistered handgun for $300 in cash. Wade asked if he was certain about what he was doing. David said only, "It's already done." He began tracking former officer Victor Morales, who had returned to civilian life after the civil case. For 2 weeks, David followed him from work to home, documenting patterns, routes, stops, and the supermarket he frequented every Thursday after 6 p.m. On April 21st, David parked across from a suburban supermarket on Westfield Avenue. At 6:47 p.m., Morales exited the store with 2 paper bags. David stepped from his vehicle holding the handgun at his side. Morales noticed him, dropped the groceries, and raised his hands. Witnesses later stated they heard Morales saying, "It wasn't me, it was Drake, not me." David fired once and missed, then twice more, striking Morales in the shoulder and chest. A final shot to the abdomen ended his life before paramedics arrived. David dropped the weapon casing, vomited beside his car, and drove away. Security cameras captured the entire sequence. By morning, Springfield homicide detectives began processing the scene. David stayed in his apartment, waiting. Around noon, Detective Raymond Harris arrived alone, not accompanied by uniformed officers. He entered without knocking and closed the door behind him. His tone was flat. "They'll trace the weapon to you within hours." "But I can make that go away." David remained silent. Harris continued. He said that Drake had used an old misconduct file against him for years. In 2004, Harris had beaten a suspect during interrogation, leaving the man in a coma. Drake learned about it later and used it to secure Harris's protection. When Brittany Holmes disappeared in 2008, Harris signed off on the closure order in exchange for silence about the assault. He admitted that Carol Collins's death had reopened his fear of exposure. "I covered them for 17 years, he said. "You kill Drake, and this all burns everyone." Harris proposed a trade. He would destroy the firearm evidence from the Morales shooting if David promised to stop. He wrote an address on a notepad, indicating where the ballistic record was stored, and left without waiting for an answer. That night, David sat at his kitchen table, staring at the note. He realized stopping would mean accepting that Drake lived free, while his mother and Brittany Holmes did not. By 11 p.m., he loaded the same gun and drove to Drake's residence in northern Maplewood. Drake lived in a single-level brick house. David entered through the basement window using a crowbar. Inside, he found the former officer asleep. He woke him by switching on the lamp and pointing the gun. Drake raised his hands and said, "You don't want this." David replied, "Right." He placed a sheet of paper on the table and ordered Drake to describe what happened in 2008 and to admit involvement in Carol's death. Drake wrote for several minutes, then stopped and looked up. "You think this matters?" "Nobody will believe it." David read the statement, a brief acknowledgement that he and Morales had picked up Brittany Holmes intoxicated, that she had died during restraint in the patrol car, and that Harris had ordered the file sealed. Carol Collins, working later in the station, found a copy. Drake wrote that she was handled before she could reveal it. When Drake finished, David folded the paper and placed it on the table. He asked, "Where is she?" Drake smirked and said, "Gone. You'll never find her." David shot him once in the head. He sat on the floor for several minutes, hands trembling, then dialed 911. "My name is David Collins," he said. "I killed Daniel Drake." The confession is on the table. He remained seated until officers arrived. The following investigation confirmed the statement's contents. Under the new inquiry ordered by the state attorney, forensic teams searched a disused storage site formerly leased by the Maplewood Police Department. In a sealed container, they located human remains later identified as Brittany Holmes through dental records. Additional documents recovered from the same site linked Harris and 3 other officers to the original cover-up. All were arrested in May 2022 on charges of obstruction and evidence tampering. David was charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder. Sandra Ortiz, his former attorney, represented him again, arguing psychological duress and prolonged institutional failure. The court sentenced him to 15 years with no parole eligibility for 10. During sentencing, David said, "If they had done their job, I would still be fixing cars." At State Correctional Facility, David spent most days in the workshop program, avoiding other inmates. In the evenings, he kept a single photograph of his daughter. Lisa had sent it before filing to block visitation. The prison chaplain said he seldom spoke except during roll call. One afternoon in the yard, an older inmate asked, "What are you in for?" David looked at the ground for a long time before replying, "For the truth."